In this video, I want to show you how the Queen of England is not the rightful heir to the throne, and I will show you how the genealogy charts that substantiate her claim to the throne are all fabricated. So the first thing I want to show you is that when it comes to the genealogy charts and the family names and the family crests of white people, these were all created by the College of Heralds in England. And according to the College of Heralds' own records, they took bribes from white people who wanted to create fake genealogy charts. These people were called social climbers because they wanted to elevate their social status by creating false genealogies. So before I continue, I want to rewind a little bit and talk about what was going on briefly in England and all of Europe before they created their false genealogy charts, so we can get a better perspective as to why they did this in the first place. So something important to know is that the Moors, who are Cushites, were living in and ruling all of Europe since the time of 700 AD, so over 1300 years ago. And actually, there's evidence that they were there long before that. And the Moors had family names, genealogies, they had family crests, they had different crowns worn by different kings and queens of different territories. They owned all of the land in Europe, and it was all documented in what is now called the Domesday Book. They controlled every aspect of Europe, from its economy to its religious practices, and the Moors were extremely wealthy. White people, however, were poor peasants and farmers who were under the rule of their black Cushite rulers. At this time, white people had no last names, no family crests, they owned no land, and they ruled nothing. In fact, the Queen of England's own family didn't even have a last name until 1917, when they adopted the name Windsor. So there's a reason why the school system in America indoctrinates African American children from a very young age, and they're taught to believe that they all came from Africa on slave ships brought by white people. And there's a reason that they don't teach our people anything about the Black Moors who ruled Europe. And you'll never find anything in any American history book that teaches you that the Black Moors were enslaving white people during the so-called transatlantic slave trade. And the reason they don't teach you this is because once you know the truth that Black Moors ruled all of Europe, that proves that we were not brought here by white people, but we were already here. And once you know the truth that the Moors were enslaving white people during the so-called transatlantic slave trade, not to mention white people tell African Americans that the Moors are the ones who sold them to the white people in the first place. But you have to think about that. Does it make any sense? Because if white people were enslaved by the Moors and being sold in markets in Africa by the Moors during this very same time, how did white people who were slaves themselves, how did they manage to purchase and sell slaves and transport them from one side of the earth to the other when they were slaves? So you have to use your common sense. And they lie to you and they tell African Americans that they have slave names. This is another great lie. And if you look at the Fairbairn Book of Crests, look at the Black royal families who were ruling Germany, Ireland, Scotland, Britain, Portugal, Italy, and all of Europe, and look at their family crest and their last names, their family names. We did not get our last names from white people. They are not slave names. White people are the ones, when they began to first create their own family crest and their own fake genealogies, they are the ones who stole our last names. as they conquered each family who had their own territory, as they would conquer each territory, they would adopt the name of the family that they conquered. So we don't get our names from white people. White people get their names from us. Remember that they didn't even have last names not too long ago. So there are several genealogy charts for the Queen of England. Starting with this one, it states that she is related to King David, King Solomon, and Moses. Now, as I've shown you guys in the Real Faces of the Bible Part 1, King David is Tutmos III. His son, King Solomon, is actually Amenhotep, and Amenhotep's son is Akhenaten, who is the real biblical Moses. And all of them were all black Egyptian kings, and they all fought the invading white races of Africa. So the Queen of England is not related to the black Egyptian kings as her fake genealogy chart claims, but she is in fact related to Alexander the Great, who is the conqueror of Egypt. And she conveniently left him out of her genealogy chart and added in the black Egyptian rulers who consecutively ruled Egypt for 39,000 years. And I just want to point out that the queen's middle name is Alexandra after Alexander the Great, her distant relative. So we see how this genealogy chart is false because we know that she's not related to the native black rulers of Africa, but she is in fact related to the invader of the African lands. So this is the second genealogy chart, and in this one she claims that she is related to the kings and queens of Ireland and Scotland. And as I've said before, if you look at the Fairbairn Book of Crests, you can clearly see that the rulers of Ireland and Scotland were all black, as well as the rulers of all of Europe. They were all black. So we know that the Moors built everything in Europe, and they also ruled Rome. And this was long before the white popes of the Vatican. So another thing that I've explained in another video is Akhenaten's daughter was married to Tutankhamun, and when Tutankhamun was murdered by Horemheb, okay, Akhenaten's daughter came to Scotland. She came to Scotland with an army, with, we don't know how many people, but she came there with many, many people from Egypt. And the name Scotland comes from the anglicized version of her name, and it translates to Scotia. So Scotia is where we get the later version of this as Scotland. So Scotia or Scotland was named after Akhenaten's daughter. And this all happened long before 700 AD, proving that black people from Egypt, from Akhenaten's bloodline, came to Scotland and other parts of Europe, long before the 700 AD timeline that we're given of the Moors coming into Europe. So the same black people who ruled Egypt during the Amarna dynasty came to Scotland and Ireland. So of course the Queen of England claims to be of the bloodline of the kings and queens of Ireland and Scotland because the kings and queens of Ireland and Scotland were Egyptians. So she has to say that she comes from the rulers of Egypt and the rulers of Ireland and Scotland because these people were of the same bloodline. So the last fabrication that I want to show you about the Queen's genealogy is that according to her genealogy, her ancestors are the white Spaniards who invaded South America and later North America. And according to the Queen's genealogy, her Spaniard ancestors gave birth to a man named Charles, who ruled Rome and the Incan Empire of South America. They even produced a false image of Charles, whose real name is Carlos Quinto, and they show him as being a white man. But the real Carlos Quinto was black, and at this time the Moors ruled Spain and South America and Rome. So Carlos Quinto, a black man, a Moor, was the Holy Roman Emperor and the ruler of the Incan Empire of South America. And we can clearly see that the queen's albino and Jewish beast ancestors did not give birth to this black ruler. So when the Queen of England claims to be of the bloodline of the rulers of South America and Rome and Spain and Scotland and Ireland and Egypt, it's all lies. She is not of the bloodline of the black royalty. She is of the bloodline of the invaders, the albinos and beasts. And although the Queen of England doesn't claim to be Catholic or German or a Jew or any of this, she actually just claims to be British. Her father comes from albinos who came from Germany and invaded Rome. And her mother is a Jew. And when it comes to Hitler, he's related to the Queen of England. He was not a German. He was born in Austria. He wasn't even from Germany. So it's obvious that Hitler, the Jewish people, and the Queen of England were all working together. And they perpetuated this lie of the Holocaust. And this is what allowed them to give the Queen of England the authority to give the land to the Jewish people, this land of Israel that's in Africa. And this is why it's important for Black people to know who they are and where they come from, and to know their true history, because we have the Queen of England ruling the earth, and according to her own records, she controls and rules 60% of the landmass on earth. But we have her doing this, and the authority by which she rules 60% of the earth is based on her genealogies, her fake and fabricated genealogies that claim that she is of the bloodline of the Black Moors who ruled Europe, of the Black Egyptians who ruled Kemet, and of the Black Moors who ruled South America. So we can see that her claim to the throne and the reason why she rules the territory that she rules is all based on lies. So one good example of the transatlantic slave trade lies that have been perpetuated by white people is the Aztec couple that was documented in the Library of Congress. This Aztec couple was brought to Britain from Mexico by the Queen of England's mother. So we can see this is one good example of what they did. They would move people around. But as I've said, white people were not capable of transporting millions of slaves during this time. So it's obvious that what they did was not bring people from Africa, but they actually brought people from Ireland and Scotland and other parts of Europe. The people that they brought to the Americas as captives were captives of war who were brought, but not from Africa. They were brought from other parts of Europe, and they belonged to the Black nobility of Europe. Just like they brought the Aztecs to Britain. They didn't transport them very far. And this is the reason why, if you look at the population of Ireland and Scotland today, they're all white, even though we know that the Moors ruled Ireland and Scotland. So what happened to them? Where did all the Black people go? So you have to understand that white people did expel the Moors from certain parts of Europe. Some of them left on their own and they went back to Northeast Africa and Morocco, but other Moors went to different places. And then, yes, there were some of them that were captives of war that were brought to North America. And what the white people did to the Aztecs is a prime example of this, because as they continuously tell us we all came from Africa, we can see that the evidence proves otherwise. Black people were already here in North America and in South America and in all of Europe. Long before white people ever set themselves up as kings, before they ever created their first genealogy charts, and before they ever even had a last name.